All right, so your I can statement is I can identify and suggest an appropriate type of statistical study when determining an aspect of a population. All right. So essentially, this is, can you identify what type of study you need to use? Very straightforward. So with this whole unit's all about vocabulary, and again, I wouldn't even really call this a unit, but all right. So first off, we have population, which just means the whole group. Now, when we're talking about population, we typically see the word parameter. All right. And that is a feature of the population. Oh, why are you being stupid? All right, so by parameter, it's a feature of the population. What I mean by feature, just as some examples, mean, standard deviation, median, those can all be features of the population. All right. Typically, those are defined using these symbols. So, i.e., for example, mu, which is what we use for mean, standard deviation, which is sigma. Oh my God, you and my freshman, come on. It's a Greek letter, y'all. Get over it. It was a Greek letter before it was a meme. Sigma. I always throw my shoe at you. All right. Now, from parameters or the population, we can get a sample, which is a part of the whole group. Now, when we're talking a sample, that parameter becomes a statistic, meaning it's a feature of a sample used to estimate a parameter. All right. So, for example, if we're talking mean in terms of a sample, we don't use mu, we use mu is a Greek letter. It looks like that. It's that little curvy M thing. It's called mu. Literally mu, mu. So instead of mu for mean, you use X bar. All right. Instead of sigma, you use capital S with a little X. Guys, get over it. Instead of Gavin, I do have things I can throw, and I have pretty good aim. So, just saying. All right. So, from there, we have our different study types. So, some of these you're probably familiar with. So, the first one that we have is a survey, which that's probably the most common type of study. So, typically with surveys, it's a list of questions answered by participants in a study. All right. Most often, used to find information that cannot be easily observed. Now, specifically with surveys, surveys are mainly opinions and personal info. So, for example, the forms that you fill out at the doctor's office, like when they ask you, have you ever smoked? How often do you drink alcohol? That's technically a survey, but it's talking about your personal info. Whereas there's other types of surveys where, like customer satisfaction surveys, the things at the receipts that most people never do. Those are talking about your opinion. What was your opinion on the service here? How'd you feel about the service? So that's typically what surveys are. All right, again, that's probably the one that you guys are most familiar with because that's the one you see the most often. Now, this is when we get kind of into science land. All right, so observational study. So an observational study is data is gathered and used to compare groups or determine generalizations about populations. Now, sometimes observational studies may include a survey. So here's kind of a good example of an observational study. So when I was in college doing my graduate degrees and my master's, all right, I had to do a huge thesis project at the end. Now, mine was specifically an observational study where I was looking at other student teachers in the department and I was observing how they were filling out something that we had to do to get our licensure, which is called the TPA. And I was observing kind of what they did and how they did it and how that affected their score. All right. So it was more so an observational study where I was not interfering with what they were doing. I was just looking at what they did. All right. So that's the difference between an observational study and an experiment. You're not affecting it in any way. You're not interfering in any way. All right. So it's not like you're introducing something new. It's not like you're testing something. You're more so just observing it from an outside point of view. All right. Another way to think about it is anyone know who Jane Goodall is? The eighth lady. The who? So if you so she was a famous scientist who was all about studying chimpanzees and gorillas, apes essentially, and relating them back to human behavior. So she would actually, quote unquote, live among the apes, meaning that she would be observing them in their natural habitat, so like in Africa and all these other places. So she could analyze their behavior and how they act. She did not actually like give them anything to test them with. It's not like she was giving them meds or anything, or like giving them like, here's a banana. I'm not going to give you a banana. All right, let's see how you act. You know what I mean? So that's kind of an observational study. You're literally just observing. All right, it's in the name. Now, experiment, that's where science comes in. All right, this is probably what you do the most of in science class or in any type of scientific study. It is treatment is assigned to two or more groups and the results are compared. One group is the control group. Does anyone know what I mean by control group? It's not affected, all right? Or they think they're taking it, but they're not, all right? And it's the only way to determine cause and effect. So what I mean by that is experiments are the only way to determine if I give someone this, it affects this. So here's the cause, here's the effect. Observational studies do not do that. Neither do surveys. Surveys can give you an idea of opinions, but they don't actually show cause and effect. Same thing with observational studies. Observational studies, you can observe behavior, but you can't prove that because of this, it causes this. All right. So, good example of an experiment, any type of medical testing. All right. So, my best friend is in the pharmaceutical business. All right. That's not what you think it means. I literally mean she works for a pharmaceutical company. All right. So, what she does is that she tests new medicines. So, like pills and stuff. And so what they do in order for it to be approved is that first off, when you're developing new medicine, you got to see if it actually works. So what they do is that they do these studies where you get volunteers of like certain parameters, meaning that they have these certain types of conditions, like basically what they're looking for, and then they see if they can treat it. So for example, blood pressure. Blood pressure medicine, they would bring in people that had hypertension or high blood pressure, and they would test to see if their medicine would lower it. And the way they would do that is that they would give the medicine in a blind testing to part of the group, and they would not give the medicine to another group, although they would think that they're taking the medicine. It's called the placebo. All right. So, you don't know exactly what placebo is. So, for my girls in here, how many of y'all girls use birth control? Gavin? All right. So, with birth control, you know how like the last row is like sugar pills? That's what a placebo is. They typically give you a sugar pill. It looks exactly like the pill that they give you, but it does nothing. All right. It literally just dissolves in your body and joins its glucose. All right. So you don't know that you're getting the sugar pill though, and a lot of times the experimenters don't know who got the placebos and who didn't. All right, that's called a double blind.
Which is really nice.
Well,
that's really nice to know about.
You know those were sugar pills?
Well, I don't take the pill.
I don't either, but they're just sugar pills. That's why. All right.
I don't have that problem, but
I don't either, but some people do. All right. So that's kind of how experiments work. It's basically saying, okay, if we give someone this, will it cause them to have lower blood pressure? Or will it cause them to have lower cholesterol or lower blood sugar or whatever? All right. It's mainly looking at cause and effect. You also see that a lot in psychology where they're trying to, so Pavlov's dog, for example, all right? You guys know that's classical conditioning. Ring a bell, dog salivates. He sees food, the dog salivates. All right. Well, the whole experiment was if I ring his bell, but I don't give him food, will he still salivate? That was so the control group was with the food, without the food was the experimental group. All right. So that's another way to think about it. Now, in studies, we are talking about all studies deal with randomization and sampling, which will result in a reduce of bias. So more accurate results reduce of bias. So what do you guys think of when you think of bias? What does bias mean? In favor of one thing over another. All right. So sometimes it's, you can think you're fair as fair can be, but there's always going to be a personal bias. All right. It may just be something that's just psychologically ingrained into you and you don't realize that you're doing it. All right. But a lot of times, if you let, say, a computer do the randomization for you, there's no bias. All right. They did the picking for you. Computers can't be biased. All right, unless you program it to be, but that's another thing entirely. But essentially, with bias, in terms of a sample, so with bias is when when results are influenced and do not represent the population. So, some examples would be response bias, questioning bias, and sampling bias. So let me talk about those three for a second. So response bias means that basically coming from the person themselves, their answer is influenced by how they lived, all right? So their responses are biased. So for example, I can think of questioning as well. All right, so that's response bias. Questioning bias, it's the way you ask the question. All right, sometimes the way you ask a question can invoke a certain response. That's why making a survey, an unbiased one at that, can be really difficult because you really have to think about, okay, if I ask it like this, will they say this? You want it to be as accurate as possible and as fair as possible. So, for example, one question that a lot of people tend to not want to answer. So, if someone just asks on a survey, do you do drugs? All right. A lot of times people will say no because of judgment, whether they're being honest or not. Whereas a better question would be to ask, like, separate into categories. Have you ever used marijuana? Have you ever used tobacco? Things like that. All right. So it's not so much of a have you ever done drugs, implying that you've done crack. All right. Whereas if you actually ask it all separately, they'll be more comfortable answering it because it's like, okay, so they know that I'm not a total druggie on the side of the street in the blue light district, but I may have dabbled. All right. So that's basically how it is. So that's why a lot of times when you go to the doctor's office, it's worded like that because they know that if they just say, have you ever done drugs? Well, what applies drugs? Like drugs can be anything from marijuana to painkillers to meth to crack. I mean, who knows? All right. How hard are we talking? All right. So,
Now.
all right. So that would be a good example. Another would be, and this is more so in terms of, well, anyone. If you ever go to the doctor and they just say, a lot of times, this is the way the doctors ask it: are you sexually active? All right. That's, most people can say yes or no, typically, honestly. Whereas if they ask, do you have sex? That's more so on, okay, I've, done it once, hadn't done it since, or it's or it's just like, oh, you're a little bit more in the risque department, and you want to, and you don't want to sound like a total harlot, as the nice, if you will. But it's just the way that they word things. That's why they word them that way, because they want to invoke an honest response out of you. All right. Sampling bias. All right. That's like, so sampling bias means that you picked a sample that you knew the results were going to sway a certain way. So that's like, a political poll asking, will you vote Republican and go to Alabama? All right. And only look at the state of Alabama. Oh, yeah, Trump's going to win. Yeah. We only looked at Alabama. Nope. All right. So that's also like, saying. That's also saying, if you're trying to take a survey of are you pro-life or pro-choice, and you go talk to the people standing outside the abortion clinic that are protesting the abortion clinic. All right. So that's what sampling bias is. It's like you pick a sample of people that do not fit what you're asking, or that will answer a certain way. All right. That is sampling bias. So those are the different types of biases that we have to look into whenever we're creating surveys, studies, whatever we want. All right. Now, look at your packet, the new one, and there is some stuff that we need to go through really quickly. All right. So we already talked about what surveys, observational studies, and experiments are. So this is the very first page of the packet. All right. So again, surveys, we then want to know how people feel, their preferences, what they own, how much they make. And they construct a survey to ask people about the sample of the parameter of interest. So does anyone know what the most famous survey in the United States is? I'll give you a hint. They take it every 10 years.
Population survey?
The census.
Is that not what that is? The population survey?
Kind of, yeah. But okay, for those of you who don't know, the census is when people come and knocking at your door and they're like, can I take 10 minutes of your time to take this census? And they're literally just asking how many people are in your household, what your race is, how old you are, what your income, stuff like that, so that they can kind of figure out, like, okay, in these areas it's this much. And it's how they make a lot of those statistics that you can Google, being like, okay, what's the average cost of living in North Carolina? All right, that's how they figure that out. Yeah.
What happens if like they do the survey and there's someone that's not supposed to be in the country in that house?
I mean, there's always going to be outliers. So then there's observational studies. And in this type of study, researchers observe the behavior. of the participants and subjects without trying to influence in any way. All right. So they're not trying to influence in any way. That's the key word here. They are not trying to influence. All right. Meaning they are just looking, they're being those weird people that are just staring at other things, just like, oh, look, I think they're going to hit the ball now. Okay. So it's like those nature documentaries where it's like the majestic lion is going after the antelope, and now it is meeting. Like, it's just people just observing from the outside to look at this. So I'm pulling this up on my butt, guys.
I have at least 20 quotes sitting over here waiting for about the break.
All right. Then experiments. So experiments. In an experiment, researchers manipulate the variables to try and determine the cause and effect. So again, medical research, that's probably the most common. A lot of psychological research too. So if I do this to you, how will you react? That's psychological research in a nutshell. All right. Now, so for example, trying to kind of figure out just how this works. So imagine you want to know whether a new diet plan is effective in helping people lose weight. You might choose any of the three methods. So if you used a survey, you could simply ask people that had tried the diet plan if they lost weight. If you use an observational study, you might monitor volunteers to try the diet plan and measure how much they weigh or lost or gained. All right. And if you use an experiment, you may randomly assign participants, one group the control group, which eats normally, whereas the other group uses the diet plan, and see how much weight they lost after, say, 2 months, and then compare them. All right. So those are kind of the differences between the three. So surveys, you're actually just asking people who tried it. Observational studies, you're monitoring people who are on the diet plan, but you're not telling them, oh, don't do it, whatever. You're not actually trying to affect their results. Whereas an experiment, you have two different groups, one that is doing it, one that's not, and you're comparing. Now, based off of these three examples, so what do you guys think an advantage of doing a survey is?
Finding out information about part of the population.
Well, finding out information, yeah, but that's kind of how all of them are. Guys, think about the act of giving a survey. Is it pretty easy to give a survey?
You have to go
Not really. You could just send a Google form. All right. You'd be surprised. All right. So, big thing about a survey is that it's easy. That's an advantage. Most people give surveys because they are quote unquote easy. It's easy to gather data. You can just do something as simply send out a Google form, have them fill it out at their leisure. What's kind of a disadvantage of a survey? It kind of goes hand in hand to what I just said. It can be biased. Why specifically? The way it's worded. So there could be bias. What's something else? So think about it. If you see just a random survey in your email, do you typically do it? No. So it really is it may not be a good sample fit. It may just be off of opportunity. So the sample is people who actually do it. All right. It may not be a good sample of the total population because, maybe someone who, they sent out a survey about your sleep schedule. Maybe someone didn't want to be honest about that they only get an hour of sleep at night. All right. So they didn't do it. All right. Whereas the good kid that gets like a solid 8 hours, which God I wish, but no, a night. Yeah, I know. Crazy concept, huh? But they actually did do the survey, so that can also skew your results, hence the bias. All right. And that's the response bias. It's who actually answers the survey. That's where the response bias is. Now, what are some advantages and disadvantages of the observational study? So if you're just observing, what's an advantage? So if we're talking about the diet plan, the observational study is specifically where you're looking at people who did the diet plan and just how much weight they lost. Corey, what do you think? Yeah, I mean, the information would be pretty accurate. All right. But on that note, what would be a disadvantage, Landon?
The info would be different for everyone because everyone's body tastes and the diet different.
Well, yeah, it could be that, but it could also be because it'll be hard to tell if the info is completely accurate because we don't have a what? Yeah, there's nothing to compare it to. Oh, my pen's being stupid. All right. Now, experiments. What's some of the advantages and disadvantages? What's an advantage of doing an experiment? Nope, this is definitely math.
You have something to compare it to.
Right. You can do a comparison. So, biggest thing is we have that control group to compare. So we can actually see the cause and effect. What would be a disadvantage of an experiment? They're time consuming. So experiments can be very, very time consuming. Guys, I don't know if you know this, but the act of even setting up an experiment takes forever. So specifically in college, all right, say you're doing an experiment in college in like one of the science departments, or you're doing a psychological experiment. We have anytime that we have to do a study or an experiment, we have to go through what is called the IRB, which is the International Review Board, meaning that we have to go through our study and we have to detail out exactly who it's for, what we're doing it on, what we're looking at, and how we're going to protect our assets if there is human experimentation involved, what we're giving them, how we're determining the control. Like we have to go through this entire form. It's like 20 pages. And it has to be approved to make sure everything is ethically sound, especially if humans are involved. So the actual act of setting up the experiment can take forever. And then actually going through an experiment can take forever. All right, because sometimes to get accurate results, it can take months, it can take years. It's not always immediate. All right. No, I just have a friend who was a science major, so I hear this a lot. So. No, my best friend literally she works in pharmaceuticals, so she talks a lot about this stuff. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is see if we can determine what type of study we're using. All right, so some keywords. Surveys, you're asking people stuff for their opinions. Observational studies, you're observing, but you're not interfering, and there's no comparison. Experiments, there is a comparison, there is a control group. All right. So for number two, or letter A, to determine whether drinking orange juice prevents colds, researchers randomly assign participants to a group that drank no orange juice and a group that drank 2 glasses of orange juice a day. They measured the number of colds that each group had over the course of the year and compared the results of the 2 groups. Is that going to be, what type of study is that? That's definitely an experiment. Why? Yep. So because it says that there is one that drank no orange juice and a group that did drink orange juice, that's your control, the no orange juice. So it has to be an experiment. All right, letter B, to determine whether exercise reduces the number of headaches, researchers randomly selected a group of participants and recorded the number of hours each participant exercised and the number of headaches each participant experienced. What type of study? Observational. So there's not a control group, so it can't be an experiment, and it's not like they're physically asking them something. It's more so they're observing. All right. To determine the effectiveness of a new advertising campaign, a restaurant asked every 10th customer if they had seen the advertisement and if it had influenced their decision to visit the restaurant. What type of study? That's a survey. They're physically asking people for their opinion. All right, letter D, to determine if a new drug is an effective treatment for the flu, researchers randomly selected 2 groups of people that had the flu. One group was given a placebo, which is a sugar pill with no physical effect, and one group was given the new drug. Researchers measured the number of days that participants experienced flu symptoms and compared the 2 groups to see if they were different. What type? It's definitely an experiment. There's a control group. And again, it's because it said that one group was given that placebo. That's your control. All right, last one. To determine if higher speed limits cause more traffic fatalities, researchers compared the number of traffic deaths on randomly selected stretches of highway with 65 miles per hour speed limits to the number of traffic deaths on an equal number of randomly selected stretches of highway with 75 miles per hour speed limits.
Observation.
I'm more curious about what the conclusion of all of these are.
So, what do you guys think? Observation, experiment, survey?
Observation.
Yeah, I would say observation with this. I mean, with the comparison, you could say experiment, but the problem is that there's no control group. So I would say this one's observational because they're just looking at these 2 stretches of roads and comparing them. So even though there is a comparison, it's not like they're saying, oh, we're going to use one of these as our control group. So, yeah. All right. So that's all that we are doing today. So what I want you guys to do now, you still got plenty of time left in class. I want you guys to at least start on that first EOC review quizzes. All right, it's only 15 questions. You get 2 chances and you get reattempts as well. All right. So go ahead and have that out and start working on that. You may also want to start studying for your next unit circle test. So I'll do that within the last 10 minutes of class. Yeah.
You said sigma?
Mathematical symbol.
You said mu?
It's a mathematical symbol. Mu means mean, sigma means standard deviation. Oh, guys, if you want to take a 5-minute break, you can do that.
You doing all the line?
Be back by 12:23.
What?
So you guys can take a 5-minute break if you want. Just be back in here by 12:23. Yes. Let me just go grab it.
Like the EOC review?
Yep, do EOC review number 1. So guys, as you're going through EOC review numero uno, take note of ones that you had issues with or ones that you just did not remember, and we can go over them tomorrow. Or if you're struggling now, you can come and ask me. Gavin. He kept trying to make me say Sigma.
That is in fact one of the quotes. It's Gavin, I do in fact have things to throw at you. I heard from a student one time, Mr. Danielson threw a skateboard at the student's class.
Oh, please. I had a band director that would throw music stands at people.
Oh, music stand?
Uh-huh.
He brought home the music band. We got quite a few new quotes today, Miss Mercy.
So guys, with the Unit 8 journal, I'm just going to do Unit 8 and 9 at the same time. So I'll collect journals around Thursday.
Go to us about that actually.
Yeah, I got too much other stuff to do. I don't feel like reading journals today.
That's fair, honestly. Are you proud of me? I did all of my Unit 8 except for one because I did not do it.
Good.
Yeah. Okay, you do my word. Miss Murphy, we're gonna make you a slideshow of these.
Oh, God.
There's a slideshow of all the quotes that you said throughout the year. Maddie, what? If you talk to me so much, Steve, you should remind me of what everything Mr. Danielson said in his paper so I can put it on the senior slideshow. I don't know why you're not doing that already. You should go ahead and start it now.